Greetings, everyone. Glad to have you this morning / this afternoon or other times of day, depending on where you are. My name is Peter Cariaga. I am an adjunct instructor at Oklahoma Christian University and also the coordinator of the Third Culture Kids Group program there. We're going to be hearing today from a couple of we're not going to be hearing a couple of presentations, but also from several speakers. And the way that we're going to do this is that we will hear two presentations for about the next 40 minutes and then move on to our discussion times, or time rather. I have a few quick guidelines. Of course, it's expected that you will have read papers, or at least as well as you could. I do request that if you have not yet read the paper, please save any questions that you have for later and first prioritize those who have read the papers. We invite you to please be fully present during the presentations, both extending and presuming welcome. And we ask that you listen actively with a spirit of curiosity. As we move into the discussion time, please try not to deviate too far from the session and paper topics. If there is something that you are interested in that connects to those topics, then by all means, feel free to ask that. But if you have more tangential questions, perhaps save those for either later or perhaps even after, depending on the availability of our presenters. Finally, we're all likely very familiar with Zoom and online etiquette, but I still want to offer a couple of instructions. First, you'll see a number of functions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're not presenting, please keep yourself muted during the presentations. Thank you very much for that. You are welcome to make session notes, of course, and to ask questions using the chat feature, and I will track those for the discussion time. During the discussion time, please keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question. And you can also ask questions in the chat using the reaction feature to raise your hand for attention, and I'll track the queue of questions. Our first presentation has multiple presenters in it. They are first Natascha Kienstra, who is Assistant Professor of Philosophy and of Religious and Worldview Education at the School of Catholic Theology at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. She holds a doctorate from the Faculty of Philosophy at Radboud University in Nijmegen. Hopefully I got that one, in the Netherlands. And for more than 20 years, she's been a didactics of philosophy teacher at the university. Professor Kienstra will also soon be taking a position, or perhaps already is in the position, of endowed professor with the chair of ethics education, and is currently designing education and research applications, all of which she's very much looking forward to. Another on the team is Monique van Dijk-Groeneboer, and she's professor of religious education at Tilburg University. She's a sociologist and psychologist with a main research topic of youth and their meaning of life. Educating religious education teachers and coaching them is a major part of her role as well. A current area of passion for her is developing a cross-faculty minor program for students of all faculties to build their professional identity by working on their resilience. And then we have Corline Melisse, who is joining us from the Netherlands this morning for us, for afternoon for her, and she is also on faculty at the University of Tilburg, as well as teaches in a secondary school in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for being with us this morning / afternoon for us today. We are looking forward to your presentation. I turn it over now to Natascha and Monique.
Thank you, Peter, for your kind introduction, and welcome for all participants to this paper presentation about reading the Bible with and beyond our ancestors. And first, I'd like to share my screen, please. I hope you can see my screen now. Yes, wonderful. We are three researchers from the Green University campus in Tilburg in the Netherlands. And we like to explicitly thank the REA committee for making this very interesting conference possible. So thank you very much for this. Oh, gaat hij niet naar de volgende? Sorry?
Try clicking on that and then see if that works.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you. I need some assistance here, so thank you. The contents of this presentation is about, first, what are the two contexts that matter in all of our research? Second, I will explain you a little bit more about the requirements for reading the Bible in the classroom. Third, how is the research set up and what are the results? Fourth, what is very important for teachers is the role of guidance in the classroom, and I will tell you more about that. And at the end, I will highlight the conclusion and future relevance of this study. Yeah. First, what are the two contexts that matter in our research? The first context is that our research focusing on examining relationships between the learning by the students and the teacher behavior in the classroom. This relationship is influenced by the teacher's design of the lesson. We always do empirical design studies. As you can see, we are in a different paradigm than the other presenter, Ron. And we publish our research in various journals. For example, in Religious Education in 2018 about religious thinking through using bibliodrama, and in 2019, Training for Interreligious Classroom Teaching about exercises to foster interreligious learning. We publish our exercises, that is, the designs for our design studies, open access, and for example, a project about ethics education that calls Ethics Community. On this website, you will find a lot of curriculum materials to do more effective ethics teaching in the classroom. And another website full of teaching materials from our research project about debating in the classroom is debaticons.com. I'll show you the Ethics Community website, and as you can see, there is a toolbar that leads to all kinds of ethics exercises in the classroom. So I will invite you, please go to that website if you need any materials. Intellectual outputs for our debate project are a teacher manual with the title Debate Philosophy, How to Start Debating in the Philosophy Classroom, and a collection of classroom worksheets and a set of 3D printed stamps. All the worksheets, the teacher's manual, and the stamps are free downloadable. And most of our research in these projects are open access as well, and deals, as said before, with the relationship between the learning by the students and the teacher behavior in the classroom, influenced by the teacher's design of worldview or philosophy lessons. The aim of using symbols or stamps in debate education are to get to know the central concept of debating, to make these concepts stick in the mind, to become aware of the structure of arguments, to make more efficient notes during a debate, and to become a better debater. So this was my introduction to our design studies. So partly is developing, I think, beautiful exercises, and partly it is research. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Monique, who will tell more about the unique characteristics of our Dutch students. And after that, I will deepen out this specific research for this paper. Monique, can I give you the floor, please?
Thank you so much.
Oh, nou word ik mooi. Maar dan moet ik share stoppen.
Oh nee, doe maar niet. Laat me aanstaan, dan praat ik zo.
Ja, dus niet yourself.
I think people can. Okay, no, we're still echoing from the other one. We have 3 computers here, so sorry.
If Monique, I think if you want to talk, we can hear it on Natascha's computer.
Exactly, that's what I was hoping for. So I won't. No, it's okay. Stay like that.
Okay.
You can hear me, Peter, right? Is that okay? Well, those are the technicalities on this remote conference we do, where we sit in very hot Atlanta, waiting for our next conference, which will be in person and live, and connected still with our wonderful colleague Corline and Melisse in the Netherlands, and all of you. So thank you so much for attending this. And as promised, I would zoom in a bit on the second context, especially in this international surrounding where we are right now gathered here. It's very important to know some things that's really worth mentioning in this specific research. First of all, that the Netherlands is very pluralistic, multi-religious and secularized. Of course, I think many of you know that already, and not all other countries are that different to attend here, but it's very specific different in regard also to RE, and I come to that later. Because more than half of all secondary schools in the Netherlands are confessional. So most of them Catholic or Protestant, is half-half almost. But it means when the country is that secularized that on these schools, many pupils attend who are not religiously raised at all at home. So they have nothing to do with the Catholic or Protestant faith, the most of them. Even most of the teachers not even anything much more to do with it. It's something, it's called, but it's not really that interesting for most of the attending teachers and pupils. However, there is a subject called religious education on these confessional schools, not on public schools. I could talk about that later also, but I'm not sure whether you're that interested in, but there we also are looking for subjects like citizenship, education or that. But where we are focusing on now and where this research is conducted in are secondary schools where we have the subject we call meaning of life. We used to call it religion and meaning of life. It's for all classrooms, so all pupils attend. That's also very different than in many other countries. Not only the Catholic pupils or voluntarily entering pupils are entering this classroom, but it is, I get distracted by the chat, but I'm sorry about that. So everybody gets that religious education class, we call it meaning of life, but the entrance and the interest in the subject itself is not that interested by everyone. So what we really want to do is look at religious educational strategies that work for that diverse population. So I do conduct research amongst secondary school pupils a lot, large surveys digitally every 5 years, which gives a lot of information about their language. What really do they use? What do they value in life? What worries them, especially now in the post-pandemic or pandemic times? I'm not sure we can already say post-pandemic. And all those surveys add up a lot of information about their language. And that's what's interesting in regard of this research. And for now, the final thing I would like to add here is that reading the Bible, for instance, as we are focusing on our subject for today, is an activity that is only relevant for a very small percentage of pupils. So only 3% of all Roman Catholic students and 16% of all Protestant students at the school do read a Bible every now and then or more often. Even the Muslim students read more often the Quran for 20% than others, but most of the pupils at all in these classrooms don't have anything to do with religious books or whatsoever. So I give the floor back again to Natascha to zoom into that specific research and then dealing with Bible texts. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique, for adding your very important research to this study. And now I'm going to the present study. In this study, we developed the exercises, exegetical reading and mystery and concepts to work with for acquiring and applying the religious concept image of God in Genesis, and by means of writing an essay, entering into a narrative dialogue regarding this concept. This leads to two design principles. First, lessons of religion education must be aimed at learning about and or from religion, depending on the objective of the lesson. Secondly, within learning about religion, the acquisition of basic knowledge, religious meta-concepts, and of religious thinking skills are important. A key element within learning from religion are exercises that aim at entering into a narrative dialogue. The students are motivated and supported by their teacher by means of scaffolding. We follow the 6 intervention strategies that are mentioned by Van der Pol, Volman, and Bijshuizen, namely feedback, hints, instructing, explaining, modeling, and questioning. And the questioning part is very relevant for our research. Based on the revised taxonomy of Bloom, Anderson, and Crutwell, 6 thinking skills can be distinguished. Analyze, evaluate, and create are higher order thinking skills, whereas remember, understand, and apply are lower order thinking skills. In religious education, all of these skills are important, and students should be given opportunities to develop them. For example, learning about religion takes place if students are able to apply religious meta-concepts in order to understand and reflect on religious phenomena. And then the thinking skills are analyze and evaluate. To enter into a narrative dialogue, higher order thinking skills are indispensable. Students should be open to the stories and visions of others and must be able to analyze these stories in order to evaluate whether elements of them can enrich their own vision. If this is the case, a renewed vision is created. Moreover, learning from religion, especially participating in a narrative dialogue, is only possible if adolescents feel safe to examine their own position, to question it, or to let it questioned by others, and to communicate about it. A safe learning environment is therefore indispensable. Cognitive semantics is used in several ways in the teaching material. In the first place, it is used to define the meaning of Genesis. Secondly, by explaining the context in which the users of the text live and speak about humankind as the image of God, the students obtain a better understanding of the word. This can reduce the unfamiliarity experienced when reading the text and result in more sympathy for the meaning of the text. The purpose is to create more openness to the text in order that students will actually enter into a narrative dialogue with the story. Cognitive grammar introduces the students to the principle of hermeneutics, which can be regarded as an important religious thinking skill. They experience that when they study biblical texts, they automatically interpret these texts on the basis of their cognitive worldview, whereas the biblical text represents the interpretation of the author based on his or her cognitive worldview. And this cognitive grammar is a specialism of our third author, Corline and Melisse. 5 lessons in 7 classes were analyzed at the school of Corline and Melisse with all her worldview and religious education colleagues. And it was done in a qualitative cross-case analysis. Several higher order thinking skills could be reached by doing the exercises. Table 3 presents an overview of these thinking skills and which were actually reached. The expected thinking skills could be actually attained by doing these exercises, and almost all the students reached that specific thinking skills that was required in order to do the exercise properly. Only with the exercises mystery and essay, some pupils didn't achieve the relevant thinking skill. The students who indicated that by doing the exercises, exegetical reading and mystery, they gained more sympathy for the meaning of the creation story, always achieved the thinking skill needed to do the exercise well. This also includes the pupils who indicated that their opinion on the question, who is humankind, has changed. In both cases, there's one exception, as there was one pupil who didn't come to analysis during the exercise mystery. And this is the slide about guidance. Due to the support of the teacher, the students were able to do the exercises. Some intervention strategies were used more often than others by the teachers, and some strategies were used specifically for certain exercises. It is striking that 11 of the 18 observed lessons involved scaffolds that had not been established prior to the study. In 10 cases, this is concerned student questioning. It was also investigated how the scaffolds contributed to the highest thinking skill reached. With the exercise exegetical reading, the students understood the text better because the teacher asked questions to the students and or answered questions from the students. This enabled the students to analyze the text more effectively. Teacher support was necessary for the exercise mystery to make the step from categorizing the given information to formulating an answer. These were also students who needed support. There were also students who needed support with categorizing. We conclude that the teacher's help was necessary to be able to solve the mystery and reach the level of analysis. So, based on the results, the conclusion can be drawn that since a large group of students was able to require the principle of cognitive grammar, the principle of hermeneutics as religious thinking skill can be addressed in religious education. Furthermore, the concept image of God and the related concepts, the worship of images and the prohibition to make graven images, are suitable to discuss in the classroom. This empirical research shows that due to implemented exercises, especially developed for in the classroom, a biblical text can be meaningful for adolescents. And instead of searching for the one correct interpretation, analytic tools can be used to show that religious practices are at work everywhere. So reading the Bible in your classroom can be an excellent choice for you and for your students. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much to our first set of presenters. We're going to take about 1 minute for a thinking break, if you will, for us to make notes, to digest what we have heard, and also to transition to our next presentation. So again, 60 seconds begins now. We now turn from religious education about texts of the Bible to the texts of the Bible themselves and their implications for religious education and for youth ministry. Our second presenter this morning is Ron Becker, and I was unable to ask about pronunciation ahead of time, so hopefully I did not butcher that. Ron Becker is a research coordinator at the OJKC, or in English, the Dutch Research Center for Youth, Church and Culture at the Protestant Theological University in Amsterdam. He is also a lead pastor at a church in Rotterdam and has worked as a youth minister in both local and national youth ministry. His PhD research is a study on biblical narratives in which young people play a role and how that can shape a theological understanding of youth. He also just turned in his dissertation manuscript, by the way, so he's in good spirits. He joins us from Rotterdam, quote, the most beautiful city in the Netherlands. That is his quote there. He is passionate about his city, but also about making Indian mulligatawny soup. Ron, I turn it over to you now for your presentation.
Hi, can I use share screen?
Yes, by all means.
All right. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for most of you. Thanks for spending time with me. This whole presentation is about, it's more as a side thing attached to the theme of ancestors. Like it's been said, I've been studying biblical narratives in which young people occur. And the one thing when you go to your library and go into the commentaries, you will find that if you spot a young person, that none of the commentaries will have something to share on it. So out of that, I started the research and I dug into some narratives in which young people occurred. And when you read those stories, you will find young people at the margins of the stories of the biblical heroes. So what I did was go into the margins and explore what their role is. I will take you to some of my research insights and apply it to the ancestor theme. When it comes to young people, you'll find them in the margins of the stories of which we now would call biblical ancestors, but what is their role? And I'll take you to a story. A narrative is in Genesis 21, and it's a story of, well, he is not named Ishmael, but it's a story of what I will call Hagar's son. And I will read the text first, and then I will give you 4 angles of looking at young people and how the role of ancestors or who are in the process of becoming an ancestor, because there's a promise out there from God, and how it impacts how we look at young people. I will read the story first. It's in the New Revised Standard Version, and then I will present the 4 angles. The story goes like this. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with the son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. And when the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. And then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, do not let me look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Now, when you look at this story, it's about a boy who is standing in the way of another boy. Or there are different ways to frame this story. Whatever Bible you take, there will be a different headline above the text. What I will show you is what language does. First is the word. In this narrative, there are 4 words, 4 different Hebrew words that are being used, and they all represent perspective of looking at young people. And the first one I want to share is the Hebrew word ben, which is simply son, but in plural it's also sons and daughters, children. And ben is always used also to indicate a tribe or a nation. For instance, when you talk about the Israelites, it's Benin Yisrael, the sons of Israel. So that's a word that's used quite a lot. And in this story, it is used to indicate the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who she had born to Abraham. And that's the perspective of the character of Sarah in the story. She witnesses, she observes a Ben, the son of Hagar, the son of the Egyptian. So when she talks about it to Abraham, she says, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, and the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son, Isaac." And then also Abraham notices, "This is my son." And again, there's the perspective changes constantly. Whose son is this? But in the end, Sarah's perspective is dominating. It's a son. It's not Abraham's son that's leading in the story, but it's Hagar's son, and this son is a threat for her own heritage. And that's the function of the word ben in this narrative. Then the second one is the word zera, and literally it means seed, and it's the word that is used for offspring, descendants. And that's the perspective of Abraham. He shared, he described that he says, "For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you." That's the word of the Lord to Abraham when he is distressed about the situation. And also, "I will make a nation of him also because he is your offspring." And that's the mindset that's attached to Abraham. He has a promise that out of him a great nation will arise. But he had a son. Well, it's a long story with Hagar, and the second son is now there, and he thinks in terms of offspring. He has a second son, and that becomes a problem in this story. Then the third one is the word hayelet, yelet, and that word is a very interesting word because as a noun it means child. Most of the time in a male version, but the word yelet is attached to the verb yalat. And yalat, you use the same characters. Yalat is a word that means giving birth, to give birth, but also from child's perspective, to be born, but also from the male perspective, to beget, to conceive, but also from a female perspective to give breastfeeding. So the whole process of conception to being born and even after that is covered by yalat. And yalat is the noun of that. And it's a word that connects a family, connects a child to his or her mother and father. Well, this word comes along when Isaac, let's call him Isaac, when Hagar's son is sent away. So Hagar is sent away with her son, and then the word Yelet comes in. When Abraham puts something on her shoulder, along with the child, sent her away. And Yelet reminds you of whose child are you? Who's the father of the child? Who's the mother of the child? That's the connection, that's the correlation that this word arises. Then the fourth one, and that's the word ha-na'ar, or boy. And that word has been the core of my research. In more than 50%, this word means boy, exclusively boy. In more than 25%, it has several meanings, but in which boy is dominant. And that word is not related to family. It is a word that expresses individuality. It's a word that expresses getting away from your family. And so, and interesting is that this word is used in relation to God, or the angel of God in the story. So in this story, in verse 12, said God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy. And then again, the narrator in the story follows the perspective of the angel of God. When it says in verse 17, God heard the voice of the boy when he's crying, when he's starving or needs water. And also, when God speaks about the boy, this word is used. When God hears the voice of the boy, lift up the boy, I will make a great nation of him. And God opened the eyes and then the water is visible, and she gives the boy a drink. And in the end, it finishes with God was with the boy and he grew up. It's a word that provokes promise and potential. And the interesting thing is that, we'll see the water comes from when the word is used, a different word is used, a different perspective is used, a God perspective is used. The word, she sees the well and the future opens up. So to summarize it, when the word son is used, it's the perspective, the eyes of annoyance, of also divisions. It sets the sons apart against each other and the mothers against each other. The word of offspring is that Abraham uses are the eyes of heritage and lineage. The fourth word is the word boy, the eyes of God. To summarize the word how it functions in narratives, it's the God perspective, it's of seeing the need, also the promise, it provokes a call to support, in this case, seeing the water, the well, but also God's protection and how God's future unfolds. And so it's a perspective that the author of the story brought in. And the question is, how do we look at young people with what perspective? What is our view? Which classes do we put on? Especially when it comes to ancestors, in the shadow of the story, something's going on. In the case of Hagar's son, it's a story of someone who needs to get away. It goes in a very awful and rude way, not an almost incompassionate way. Then God interferes, and then in the end, Ishmael will become an ancestor himself. So there's a lot of tension in the story, perspectives that clash on one another, that don't go well together, and that's in a subtle way. It's written down by the author and the editor. So basically, I just want to end the share screen now. How do I close the share screen? Stop share, yeah. So when we read stories of ancestors, something's going on in the margin of the story. And that's been my case, reading the stories of young people in the margins. And also observing that when you become an ancestor, there's some damage done to children. And sometimes it needs to be done for them to become an ancestor themselves, but also some damage could be prevented. Let's stick it to there.
Thank you so much, Ron. Let's take another 60 seconds to write down questions if we have any, to take breath, to stretch even if you need to. We'll come back again in 60 seconds. We now move into our question and answer time. And so if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat if you would like, or by all means, feel free to also either raise your hand, or during a pause in the discussion or after someone has finished answering a question, also feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. We've had a couple so far, and one from Paulos Cristianto is the question of no small import. How do we encourage young people or students to still read the Bible and to reflect on it? That is open to any of our presenters who would like to, and they're all thinking, okay, do you go first? Do I?
We are deciding, and then also making choices which device to turn on. That not everyone is turning around in this small room, so that's the weird thing that was taking the time. But thank you for that question, and that's not an easy part to encourage them, and yet alone. Also, young people are very open for these stories, as Ron beautifully did just now. We heard texts, and speaking them out loud already makes you aware of this is special text. There's something going on, although we don't know who. Well, as in they would put it, who the hell is Hagar? But when you hear the words pronounced, you get that touch. And young people now more than ever are really vulnerable for that, and looking forward to that. So when you don't start with, now we're going to read the Bible and I want to tell you this is the true story of God and you're going to be happy if you read it, then you lost them all. But if you start with a story and connect it to yourself, or have a nice research strategy as we sort of are trying to develop nowadays, then you can open up much, much more than ever, because they're very longing for it, and also the time is very ready for people to be able to think about more than just the achievable, measurable things that are there in life, because they are very much aware that in this COVID time, nothing comes through from your expectations you ever had. So that's for starters, but Natascha was dying to say something too, so she will add up, and then we give the word back to you, if that's okay.
Yes, well, definitely add something to Monique, and thank you, Paulus, for your very interesting question, because that's the heart of our research that we are doing on our faculty with the three of us. And it's really connected to the higher order thinking skills, reflecting, and how can you make didactic moves to that students are really reflecting in the classroom. And they can reflect, of course, in their heads, but we can't measure it in research. But they also can have their reflections on paper or on their laptops nowadays, or have their reflections in dialogues, really in the classroom. And what we do in our design studies is developing exercises that really give students the tools to come to reflection, or, for example, the Bible text. And as said, that can be on paper, but especially that happens in dialogue in the classroom. And therefore, as I told you before in my presentation, we have a few design principles, and one of a very important design principle is, of course, that it is safe. There is a safe environment in the classroom, so the students can think aloud, and can listen to each other. And it's very important that the students also are asking questions to themselves and dare to answer those questions. As we told you in our research, that the teacher behavior is so important, has a big role in the classroom. And it is very important that the teacher let the students ask their own questions. And in our paper in religious education in 2018, we researched that. And the most important role in the religious education classroom from the teacher is that he or she listens to the students. That's one of the most important role. And the reflecting part is coming on his own, as to say. Thank you for this very interesting question.
Can I add?
Thank you.
Yeah. What I did was using a narrative approach. And it's been very useful also for reading stories or narratives, because it asks simple questions like, okay, what are the characters doing? What are the characters saying? It's a reader-centered approach, and invites you to you don't have any knowledge at all, just to read the story and engage with it. A few years ago at OJKC, we did a research in the Netherlands about the use of the Bible at schools. Unfortunately, it's only published in Dutch. But one of the key issues was that the teachers were, well, not to say they were the problem, but they had difficulties and also prejudice towards the Bible, and they didn't know how to do this. And a narrative approach is a way of challenging and inviting young people to engage with stories, because they love stories. And a narrative approach can just simple questions helps you analyze what is going on.
We have a couple of other questions. Israel Diaz has a question regarding the content of the presentations. What approaches what approaches do teachers take to teach and assist students with the principle of hermeneutics? Perhaps this is most directly related to the first presentation, but if Ron, you have ideas on this as well, feel free to jump in.
Yes, well, it's very close to the former question, and at least my answer is very close to that. But Israel, thank you very much for your question. And I think the approach is dialogue in the classroom. And what the teacher needs to do is questioning and let students question on their own. That's well, at least that's very effective. What in a lot of our research states out.
Yeah, and I have just a thought on what you were suggesting about the role of hermeneutics and the teacher, and Paulo's question about how to make relevance. Ron's point is well taken, right? The idea of narratives and then being able to connect. But I'm also wondering, as educators, as we're prepared, that our understanding of the actual meaning of the text, right? For example, you're talking about Genesis chapter 1, themes like chaos and God bringing order to chaos, right? Adolescents are dealing with so much chaos. I wonder if some of these themes, if we come prepared with the exegetical narrative of the text, right, the background, can help us to also make those connections that the narrative at the surface may not, right? So if the text is talking about liberation, as we've mentioned before, or like you mentioned in your presentation about what it means to be human, I wonder if those connections can also be ways to get the youth attention.
Okay, thank you so much for responding to that, Israel. And I sort of, if Peter is okay with that, I would like to attach it to the question that Ellen also put in the chat, that was about how young people, if they see themselves in the margins of the text, how can on ever they sort of feel connected to the Bible text itself. It's the same thing, but opening up the thing, just as you did earlier, you have to be able that you have a theme that really connects to their surroundings and their everyday life, and chaos is definitely one. So thank you for that one. That's very obvious one. And as it also came to mind from a workshop I attended yesterday, that also females have a lot of issues there, that they are never recognized in stories, only then being mother of some beautiful holy people gathering there. I do it now a bit out of on the edge, but you get the idea that that's very difficult to have good role models in ancestors, also good role models in Bible context. So to get there into that, we do have strategies developed, and I'm very happy that I see my other PhD student, Juliette van Deursen, also present here. She's already smiling now, as you can see which one she is. Hi, because she's conducting research on Lectio Divina, how you can use contemplative issues of strategies to deal with Bible texts, just to read a few lines, just as I said Ron earlier did, and then stay still and let them stay still, silent, pause to that text and memorize the sentences and see which is in it. And when you do that, even with 12, 13-year-olds or 16-year-olds who have nothing to do with Bibles, and when you don't mention it, it's the Bible, then they open up, otherwise they even shut down immediately. But when you get into that classroom as a teacher, the role, again, as Natascha earlier already said, is very important, as the teacher is open to get into that adventure and really see what's going on when you open up and say, this is the text, and which word strikes you or irritates you, or what does it do, and can we see what that does with the meaning of the Bible text then, well, that's the thing you open up and then you get into it, but you don't know the answers. It's not a one-way sort of being a disciple and saying, this is the text and this is the way we have to go. And if you open up like that as a teacher, then you can deal with all the texts, even if users in the margin, they're in the margin in nowadays life. Also, politics should listen more to them when they demonstrate on abortion laws or on climate change. Please let them get out of the margin. So yeah, we can work with that. That was my idea for answering as well Israel's question as Alan's. Thank you for that.
Ron, would you like to weigh in on Alan's question, or Alan, if you have any qualifiers that you want to give, feel free to do so.
Okay, which part of the question?
Sorry, that's if young people are likely to find themselves only on the margins of the text, which may seem to confirm their place in the margins of faith communities, might they be even less likely to read it? Or can the margin be reclaimed in some way?
Because it's mainly my first observation was that it's in the margins of the stories, but when young people occur, something is about to happen. That's what the word na'ar in Hebrew does, also the female equivalent of it. But we're way behind when it comes to exegesis, because it's youth is non-existent in biblical exegesis. That's the first problem. That's what I wanted to tackle, at least. Maybe I've done it, I don't know. But then again, when you do close reading on those stories, then you can invite a young person to say, okay, where's the youth in this story? And well, that's a question, and that's what I find the tricky thing also, but also the good thing about what you do with Bible stories. In the paper of Monique, there's a big confidence in exegesis. Literally says, then you know the meaning of the text. Well, it is ideological loaded. Many exegesis, that's what I've found, is full of ideology and perspectives. And the good thing about Lectio Divina is it's so reader-centered and it's spiritual, if you're into that, that you can let the text speak for itself. And of course, background is useful, but you can actually choose, because that's the role of a teacher, to choose the text with the pupils will read. But there are stories of young people. You can find them, but we have to look better. They are in the margins, and when you have asked this particular question, what does the young person do? It can open up something.
Thank you for those responses. Juliette also has a question. How can creative didactic teaching methods contribute to the deepening of the learning process of reading biblical narratives?
Yes, well, I missed the first part of the presentation. I'm sorry, it didn't work for me to get in on time, so perhaps I've missed it, but I think with the Lectio Divina model, it's very important to use creative working forms of methods, because then the students are able to choose, and they're able to deepen the learning process. And I was wondering if the presentations, the people today who made a presentation have also experienced that the creative working forms are important, and how they can be used. Because otherwise it's also always a lot of cognitive working forms which you are using, perhaps.
Maybe I can invite our third author, Corline, because she designed a series of beautiful exercises and really grabbed the creative part in that. So maybe Corline, can you tell us something about your exercises and how it worked in a classroom? Is that okay?
First, I'd like to respond to Ron because he said something that exegesis is very full of ideology, but the clue was in my research, in our research, that we use exegesis just to speak the text for itself. Because the cognitive grammar was used to see the concepts of the text, how the concepts work in the text for the author of the text. So not our ideology, but just the concepts for the author of the text. So in your presentation, for example, that the concept of boy is always used not related to family. That's a concept, and it's the concept of the author. And we see maybe the concept different because a parent can say in Holland, for example, oh, that's my boy on the picture. So that is related to family. Mm-hmm. But you have explained that in the biblical text, it's not related to family. So that's the concept, how the teacher, no, I'm sorry, how the author of the text, the writer of the text, is using the concept. By means of cognitive grammar, cognitive semantics, you are trying to get to those concepts, and not your concept, but how the writer of the text is using concepts. So it's not ideology. The clue is to speak the text for itself. So I think that's maybe something I had to explain. To answer the question from Juliette, you are right. The exercises were very cognitive because the idea was that if the students are understanding the text, so if they know the concepts and they know what the text means, the text is less foreign for them or less weird, or how you can say it. And then they get hopefully more sympathy for the text. So it was not like in your research, the Divina, the Lectio Divina.
Corline has also done in her classroom, so she knows about it.
yes, yeah, we have done it last year. And in your research, it was more, how should I put it? More be reflective in another way, more like empathy and getting pictures about it and feelings about it. And in my research, it was more cognitive because of the topic cognitive semantics is used to understand the meaning of the words. And as a consequence, having more sympathy for the text because it's less weird or less weird is thinking is the words the students use, I think. So in the end, they had to write a text. They had to recreate the text. So that was very cognitive. If you want to see all the, it's not the time and place now to explain all the exercises, but the exercises are more reading and dealing with the text in writing and not contemplating like in your research.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because but the writing that the students did they also have to use their fantasy or their own imagination or something.
Yes.
So it's a form of
Yes.
creative writing, I think. Okay, thank you.
So the exercise was to recreate the creation story from their point of view. So.
Thank you for those responses. Chuck Chesnavage has been very patiently waiting. So I'll turn it over to you, Chuck, for your question.
Thank you, Peter. Hi to everyone, Natascha, Corline, Monique, and Ron, thank you for your papers. It's just that text, and for making the attempt to make the Bible more attractive and interesting for young people in particular. For those of us in the classroom, it's kind of an exciting time, because especially with youth and children who have not read the Bible stories, to present to them Bible stories and to invite their feedback and their insight and their engagement with the text is extremely exciting. It's seeing something taking place right before your eyes as to how someone interprets a text that many of us may take for granted. I know for me, I was talking about the woman caught in adultery. You know, we can't assume any previous knowledge of any of these stories, no matter how familiar they are to us. So to go over the woman caught in adultery story and to have the students ponder what's going on there. I'm wondering, and the big questions I have using the image and likeness of God lesson story in Genesis is there was a decision made, obviously, to choose the first creation story, not the second. But I really wonder how they interpret humankind in light of that story. Because despite that text, which is one of the most important texts to guide ethics, morality, empathy, that every single human being is made in the image of God, the reality is not the case. Just giving in the United States examples of racial disparity. And so I really wonder if the students, besides rewriting the story in their own words, which was the goal of the research, to see how they would rewrite the story, were actually able to interpret it as applied to humanity. And with that text being everybody made in the image of God, whatever the situation is in pluralistic, secularized Netherlands in terms of everyone walking around respecting each other, no matter what race, no matter what religion. If the Netherlands is that perfect paradise of acceptance and welcoming of all people, congratulations for living in heaven and paradise in the Netherlands. But if there's a reality where that's not quite happening, where right relationships is not happening, were students able to put the puzzle pieces together to see the inconsistency of such a strong belief that looking in the mirror is seeing the face of God, and yet everyone is not necessarily being treated equally. Did any of that come out of this discussion and those kinds of writing? Or is that part two?
Well, you have a very interesting point. The real answer is the students didn't get that relation. But I have to say, the investigation, the research was in 2019, before Black Lives Matter, for example. And what I experienced the last year, because of Black Lives Matter and ethnic profilation and all those kind of things, the topic is now very relevant. And students talk about it all the time, and they want to get more information about equality and such themes. But this transformation in class was after my research. And I was thinking, if I can do it again in class, maybe I can make a hint to this relation to the students, because you are totally right about the fact that people aren't equal, unfortunately, in this world, and that lesson can take from the biblical story. So I hope this is an answer to your very interesting question.
Do our other presenters like to weigh in on that? Thank you, Chuck, for your question and for your patience with it. Paulos also has another question.
Okay, thank you. And when I thank you for presentation and response about there are the connection with head, hearts, and hands or action to do something after the young people or the student read the Bible and use so many kind of approach like lectio divina and so on. But my enlarged question from the first until I heard the presentation and the opinion from the presenters, we held the situation on young people is like the non-context, post-Christian, spiritual but not religious. I think this is a challenge to young people, and how to keep encourage them to still read the Bible also. Because when we enlarge this situation into like the science, the Big Bang is more interesting than the Bible. Or maybe the story about flood and Uma Alice, like right on the chat, or many and so on and so on. And maybe the question is if God still do good things, why evil is happen, and so on and so on. This is a part situation can make the young people be challenges the nuns and maybe be agnostics maybe or atheism or etc. From this situation, what kind of our approach is still relevant to the young people? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paulus, for your elaboration here. And it's really out of my heart what you write, what you tell us now. So that's why I jump in on it immediately. I hope other presenters will follow up and add to it. But I think it's really special that the young people today are very open for that. So especially the nuns or the atheists or the humanists or whatever they call themselves. I have lots of data on that, of course, but that's not for today. What I find out that everyone who has nothing to do with anything religious is way more interested in all these stories and finding their roots somehow, somewhere. And if it is in ancient texts, even the better, because it's a traditional thing and it's something about ancestors that's more of humankind, more relevant than the everyday life they are in. So what I see on the other part of my research that also was not presented today, we can't do everything, is that I work on a cross-faculty minor program where I especially work with students on economic faculty, on law faculty, on psychology faculty, who are those nuns who have nothing to do with anything religious, not our theological students. Those are the easy ones to interrupt with these discussions and elaborate on nice learning strategies and religious education strategies, but they have nothing to do with it. And the only thing they really were grateful for was just providing them some safe space to open up. So they just sit there and exchange when they felt vulnerable, when they were in their room studying in a strange country, strange city, not seeing any other students because they weren't allowed to attend lectures. So they were sitting in their room praying, only praying that Wi-Fi kept working, and then what to do. So how do you find your strength to sit on that computer and to get into that life? And especially then, when it gets that vulnerable, they are more aware of those sort of times when you really need something in your chaos, in your totally alone, emptiness, a lot of depression going on with young people nowadays, as well as a lot of burnouts we saw in another session as well, because of the high achievement levels that are expected of them. Those combinations together, and then being on remote forever and being online forever, and finding your way in making choices to get a happy life, to make the world a better place and add with your talents. It's huge, really, it's huge where they're in. And they don't have to be aware that religion can help them, but they have to be aware that we allow them to find their answers and their roots, and to be standing up and just applaud that they even do. And then reading small parts of scripture, or just having time to pray together, or just to be silent and make space to, relate to God, even if you don't call him or her God, just to be opening up and allowing that. As we can do that as teachers, then we do the most important thing ever. And I don't mind if it isn't called Bible studying or religious education. It's wonderful if you can add something there, but you definitely can use your own roots there, and that's what we do all the time, of course. But thank you for challenging me to add this, and I put myself on mute again so others can react as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other responses, excuse me, from our presenters? If no one else has a burning question, I have one that I'm wondering. On the one hand, there's the universe of possibility that Chuck kind of mentioned earlier with regard to children or youth reading the Bible, especially if it is for the first time, or at least the first time with those particular stories or other texts. On the other hand, we don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel each time that they read these texts. There are others who have asked questions, and at least from our perspective as religious educators, there are better questions that they could be asking. What then might be the balance between allowing for open-ended possibilities and also perhaps not necessarily closing off some, but showing them, okay, let's go on this path through the garden rather than trampling on the flowers or other vegetables there, to kind of mix images.
Maybe I can give a small answer based on earlier research I did, and that is that teachers who have an academic study in the field of theology and are trained, so they are trained teachers, and they have the best equipment to ask questions, relevant questions in the classroom. So what I pointed out in earlier research is that teachers who don't have that equipment, well, they ask all kinds of questions, but it's more how you say that? It's more, well, not to the point questioning. So you really need that heritage as a teacher. So, well, my hypothesis was not that sharp first in the research. So I thought, well, a teacher can ask all kinds of questions, but it turned out that specific academics and trained have the best questions as a teacher. And of course, that's the heritage you have.
Thank you. We have time for one more question if anyone has one. Go ahead, Natascha.
Thank you. Well, actually, it's a question to Ron, because I read his paper. It was a very interesting paper. Thank you for that, Ron. My question was, because you explicitly said in your text that it's about male characters. And I was wondering why male characters? Because I'm a female, and in the classroom I want to have resonation with female characters, of course. Can you please explain something about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The problem is when you start digging in Hebrew, because it's a field that hasn't been explored yet. So what I did in my dissertation is finding which words are being used to indicate that we're dealing with an adolescent person. And then from there, create a field to work with. Now, when it comes to, I had to limit myself to Hebrew because Greek is more complicated. There are extra methodological questions that come along, because from the Greek you have to compare it with the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Tanakh, and go back. And when you get to the Hebrew, and my focus was at the adolescent period, then there are three words that really come to mind. First is the na'ar. That's the word I used. Second is the na'ara, but it overlaps with the field of what's called the betula, the virgin. And so when it comes to female situations, they are there, absolutely they are there, but it is more complex to study because you have the field of language that is more differentiated. I'm still there because you are all frozen on my screen. So basically, it's more, the only reason is that I had to make first.
I know earlier today, Ron was having some trouble with his computer, so that may be part of what is going on there. If he's able to join us again, we'll let him finish his thought as his computer allows, and then we will close our time this morning.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there he is. Well, we were able to hear him, and then the ether took him out of Zoom. At the same time, we're very thankful for him. If you have additional questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to him or our other presenters directly via email. Email addresses are on the REA website, and you can access those through the main website, not through the meeting webpage. Sorry, Ron, did you have a final thought for us? Oh, you're muted, Ron.
I'm not sure what you heard from my response. I'm afraid we're in the same situation.
Okay. Yeah. Lakeisha, would it be okay if we were to keep this room open for any who would like to stay in longer after our time together?
We do have other sessions happening after, so Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I don't know what did you get from my response, because
Salik?
Sorry, go ahead.
At least we could hang out later, but we have another session at 12, I'm afraid. But I would really very much like to thank you, Peter, for making this such a wonderful session, for putting all the questions in the chat and all mixing it together and preparing us so well in advance and yeah, handing us the floor. So thank you for that. And I would like to take one word to close with that. Thank you.
And thank you all so much. We have heard today about making the Bible familiar to students, as well as a presentation making it unfamiliar to us, but all have involved drawing us closer into the text for the sake of life together today. Thank you, and have a marvelous rest of the REA meeting.